Welcome into the only fantasy football channel in the UK dedicated to the Fantasy Gameday platform, the UK's fastest growing and quite honestly, best DFS platform out there. Each week, myself and Rich are here giving you 15 minutes of our thoughts on how to approach the slate ahead of us. We'll talk strategy. We know Rich has absolutely dominated on Fantasy Gameday since they were born. Picks, players that we like, and much more. Hit that subscribe button as we try to grow this channel from scratch and make the UK DFS scene great again. Rich, I was just telling you before we started recording, I don't like this slate. I'm going to throw it out there nice and early. We've talked on our weekly preview show over on the Fantasy Sanctuary channel, which the link is in the description, about every game. And almost every game feels like there's one avenue within it, which I really like, something good which we can exploit. But there's not as many shootouts or as many games which I really want to be aggressive on. Do you think that there are different ways out there which we can attack this?
Yeah, I think this is where we come at it slightly differently, isn't it? In terms of you're looking at that over under and you're looking for those juicy matchups to attack and try and stack as much as possible. And I'm coming in it from a position of pure value and I'm trying to find as much value as possible. And there are probably 3 or 4 backfields at the moment. They're a little bit up in the air as you head towards Sunday. I think Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, potentially even Devin Singletary. If those 3 guys play or don't play, I feel like that completely changes this entire slate, because if they don't go, the likes of Ray Davis, Tyron Tracy, Trey Sermon, Goodard, they're all really good options at incredible value and prices. However, if those stud running backs do play, all of a sudden we're scratching around for value at the running back position and really struggling for options. So yeah, I think as we head towards Sunday, as we're starting to put those lineups together, it really depends a lot on probably 3 or 4 key players and whether they're going to suit up on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And obviously, if there are updates and players who miss out, we will be talking about them here on Twitter as well as here on the channel. We might put a couple of quick videos out over the weekend. But let's get to our captain picks. We know how important they are. Last week, we saw huge amounts of people gravitate towards CD Lamb, who obviously wasn't a good pick. We saw Bijan Robinson, who disappointed a bit. My best lineups had Derrick Henry at captain, who was a slightly less popular pick. Perhaps he should have been more popular. Kyren Williams is the first guy we're going to talk about. His yards per carry the first 3 games was really disappointing. He was down at 2.9. Over the last 2 games, it's jumped to 4.8. He's had at least 1 rushing touchdown in every game this year, as well as a receiving touchdown in 1. He is the only running back averaging over 80% of their team snaps, sitting at 84%, 5 clear of the next, which is Saquon Barkley. Do you want Kyren Williams just as captain in as many games as possible? Do you think this is just a very obvious game script for him?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a wide receiver that is also very clear, and perhaps we'll come to him shortly. But for me, Kyren Williams is the clear option. He's the highest player in terms of non-quarterbacks, in terms of what I've got in my projections. I think that this is a really juicy matchup where this Raiders team, it feels like it's very close to just completely quitting and mailing in the rest of the season. And I think that the Rams are going to absolutely dominate them. I think this offense flows through Kyren Williams, potentially Cooper Kupp being bit back could be good because it could force that kind of extra body out of the box and make the Raiders be a little bit more honest to the pass game, shall we say. But I think Kyren Williams could see a huge amount of touches. I think he's an absolute beast inside the red zone. We see him time and time again get those goal line touches, goal line carries and score. And I think, look, anytime a guy's at 7,200 and we're talking about him being the best player on the slate, that feels like decent value as well. We've seen Alvin Kamara was up over 8,000 last week. Saquon Barkley was higher than this. Like, it's a good value for a guy that could easily get you 20 points.
Yeah, and I mean, the Raiders ranked 28th in DVOA against the run. They allow the 9th most running back fantasy points. They've allowed a top 12 finish in each of their last 3 games. It's just very hard for me to see a world where Kyren Williams doesn't pay off that cost that you just mentioned. Perhaps if Blake Corum sees a more active role, but even then, I think that Kyren Williams is going to get the goal line work, and that'll matter a lot. Let's move to Justin Jefferson, though. Minnesota, they are 29th in passing plays per game, so definitely not giving us the kind of volume that we typically like. Justin Jefferson is 21st in receptions per game among wide receivers. He is the wide receiver 8 in PPR. What is it about this matchup that makes you think that Justin Jefferson could explode?
I really like this matchup as a game in total, I think that it's one that not everybody's going to be on, but I think that it could be huge. We talked in our game day preview over on the main channel. This is almost 50-point over under, and I feel like the two teams, the way they're going to get each other is through the pass. I'm a little bit concerned about Sam Darnold, but I think that that's questions about him kind of processing things like that. In terms of forcing the ball to Justin Jefferson, I've got very few concerns, very few question marks. And I just think that Justin Jefferson is going to be an absolute volume hog this week. He's priced down at 6,600. Compared to someone like Kyren Williams, we're saving £600, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when it means you can move around and spend up at other positions, that's quite a lot. If you can get a captain that has true kind of slate breaking blow up potential against a poor Detroit Lions secondary that's missing Aiden Hutchinson and the pass rush, at 6,600, it feels like great value. He has the ceiling. And I do also think that potentially he's not going to be one of the more owned captains as we see this week, because I think people are tending to head towards potentially another matchup or maybe a running back position.
Yeah, and both teams in this game, the Lions and the Vikings, are bottom 3 in fantasy points allowed to the running back position, but they are both top 4 in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. It is definitely the way to attack them, like you mentioned. Let's move on, though, and expand things slightly and talk about our stacks of the week. This one is your suggestion, Rich, and it feels like there's going to be plenty of chalk that navigates towards this one, because this is a game which everyone wants to attack. Last week, everyone wanted to attack the Ravens and the Commanders, or, everyone was going to the Cowboys. So how is it that you think, if you're building Jane Daniels and Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, do you think you can still get different enough in the rest of your lineup where you'd be able to scrape your way into the top few places?
Yeah, I think that you can build a lineup around this matchup at the core, but you just need to be conscious. You need to get different and do different things at other positions. I think you could potentially go a step further in this kind of stack as well. There's options to add in potentially Chuba Hubbard. I quite like Zach Ertz at value at tight end this week. I think you could get really, really kind of onslaughty in this game. And if it blows up and turns into the potential matchup that we're all expecting, you're sitting in a good position. Again, you just have to be conscious. You've got to get very different at the other positions. But it feels like this is a superstar stack in terms of what Deontay Johnson's doing in terms of red zone usage and target share over 25%. Terry McLaurin feels like he's just producing week in, week out. And Jane Daniels is, playing amazing football, but the rushing production is fantastic. But you're not having to pay in obscene prices. Deontay Johnson, 5,400. That's a good price. Terry McLaurin, 6,000. Those are prices of guys that I would be playing standalone. And then you add in the fact that you can add in the kind of the stack and the matchup. It feels like it's a really good one. You've just got to be a little bit conscious of that chalk.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot of these kind of stacks that go to Ray Davis. If James Cook doesn't play, we'll see a lot of Ray Davis in these stacks. I think you could end up seeing a lot of guys like Chase Brown if Zach Moss sits. Those kind of, that price range is where people are going to want to build around this, and then jam in another stud wide receiver. So if you can flip that build in any way, then it will definitely be useful. I mean, you're talking about a Commanders team who are tied for first in points per game. You've got Carolina, who play single high at the third highest rate. Jaden Daniels is second in completion rate against them. Carolina ranked 31st in pass defense DVOA, 32nd against the run. So I like your point about putting Brian Robinson on some of these stacks. I think that's a good one. Noah Brown seems to have the wide receiver 2 job locked down in Washington, so I wouldn't be against putting him in there. My stack is going to one where we've got the Eagles, who've been a bit underperforming. We talked about that on the weekly preview show, but I think that Jalen Hurts can put up enough fantasy points and get there in this matchup, because the Giants, opponents are passing on them. Opponents against the Giants have the third highest pass rate over expected. A.J. Brown had a 38% target share last week against the Cleveland Browns. Malik Neighbors looks like he should be fine to play. And the Eagles will have the 6th most wide receiver fantasy points. So it feels like people perhaps aren't piling onto this game as much as they might want to. Are you down on my stack here, Rich?
I wouldn't say down. I think it's, if you're looking to get different, I think this is a really good way to attack it. There's potential for a blowout. I don't think the over-under is particularly high. And obviously these guys are costing a little bit more when you're looking at where Neighbors and Brown are priced, but they're the kind of players that can, they can win you your matchup and produce their value on one play, can't they? We've seen AJ Brown get deep several times. I guess if you're looking to get different, I think it makes a lot of sense going this way. I think for me, I just don't love the value here quite as much as I do on the last matchup.
And that's why it's my stack of the week, because I think people aren't going to be on it as much as possible. And that's kind of what I'm looking for on this slate. I'm looking to build a little more uglier. And I think that you can use this game to leverage against those Jaden Daniels stacks. I think that like putting guys like Brian Robinson or Chuba Hubbard into these lineups will help them as well. And let's talk about those guys, because in our favorite plays, we are starting with Chuba Hubbard, who is playing with Andy Dalton, who is first in check down rate among quarterbacks who played 2 or more games at 18.8%. He's had the 5th most running back touches per game since week 3. How much confidence do you have in Chuba Hubbard at this point?
Yeah, massive. I mean, how can you not? You look at the way Andy Dalton's been playing since he's been under center. It's been huge amounts of checkdowns, Chuba Hubbard, and Chuba Hubbard's been getting force-fed the ball and has been fantastic for fantasy since then. I like Chuba Hubbard so much. I think he's a sneaky captain play this week. If you're looking to potentially spend down at captain, get a little bit different, I think Chuba Hubbard has got the value, has got the ceiling potential, and it's a different way to attack that Panthers Commanders matchup. If you're not wanting to go for the obvious stack, maybe you can throw Chuba Hubbard in as your captain, and if it blows up, you're going to sit there and be looking very pretty.
I love that. Yeah, the Commanders, of course, bottom 10 run defense in DVOA. So definitely a team you can run on if you can keep pace with them. Mine would be Brian Robinson from the other side of this game. Austin Eckler was just playing bad last week, 9 for 21 on the ground against difficult Ravens run defense. Eckler does still have some juice in the receiving game, but look, this just seems like the perfect matchup for Brian Robinson. Carolina have allowed 6 different running backs over 19.8 PPR points. They've allowed 10 running back touchdowns so far, rushing touchdowns. They've allowed 12 rushing touchdowns in total, the most in the league. I just think with Brian Robinson coming off the injury at the same price as Chuba Hubbard, people are going to overlook him a little bit, and I think he can be a really good play.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he was obviously carrying this injury for a couple of weeks. He sat out last week. He's already got limited practice in on Wednesday. We'll see what his kind of line is on Thursday. But the fact that he's practicing that early in the week shows to me that he's almost back to full health. That 1 week off has really done him wonders. And hopefully he can get back to the player he was before the injury.
Now, our last player, Juju Smith-Schuster, 3,800. Rich, I've got to say, I'm not really into it. 7 for 130 last time he went out, though, and I wasn't into it then, so I was wrong then. He had 13 PPR points in that game before the bye week. The Niners' DVOA against wide receiver ones is the second best, and I think we have to call Juju Smith-Schuster their wide receiver 1 by default. They have given up the 6th most fantasy passing points, but at home, San Francisco have given up the 18th fewest fantasy points. The Chiefs haven't been particularly great on the road so far. They've scored the 4th fewest fantasy points on the road. I wasn't into it last time, and I was wrong. Are you confident that Juju is going to keep the good vibes going?
I think this is purely for me a value play in terms
Right.
of I don't love the ceiling potential. I don't think that he's going to be a slate winner as such. But at 3,800, he's kind of £2,500 less than the stud wide receivers. He's the only wide receiver on the slate that I've got projected to 3x their value. And I just think that if he gives you 12, 13, 14 points, he opens up so much for the rest of your lineup at this cost. It's a good kind of high floor, low cost pick to make. Do I think he's got the potential to score 20 points and kind of win you the week? No. But I just think that he's not quite an enabler at this price, but he does open up the lineup to potentially attack some of those studs, those high price players at other positions.
Yeah, and I misspoke. He did score 20 PPR points last time out, which, of course, if you got anything over 15, you'd be pretty happy at this price. So I do get it. I'm not overly high on that game environment as a whole this week. But let's talk about some of the key enablers, as you mentioned. Ray Davis at 2,200. If James Cook doesn't play again this week, is Ray Davis going to be the most popular player on this slate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, priced at 2,200, if he gives you 7 fantasy points, that's a good start. Like, this feels like if James Cook doesn't play, Ray Davis should probably be in every single lineup because he opens up so much at this price. If he gives you 10, 15 points, it's like 7 times cost, which is just absolutely bonkers. You're not going to find at any other position, any other value on the slate. We saw on Monday night how good he was and how good he could kind of complement this offense in terms of it feels like they've been craving that power back. I'll be honest, I was surprised at how good he looked in the receiving game. I didn't expect that from him as a prospect coming out. So the fact that he's done that in the first time he's been given workload, worst case scenario, I think he's going to get some workload if James Cook is healthy. I don't think I'd probably play him in this sort of matchup if James Cook's active. But at 2,200 on a lead back on one of the best offenses in the league in a decent matchup, yeah, it's going to be incredibly chalky, Tom. But can you get away from it at that cost?
No, and I don't think we necessarily need to. You mentioned the receiving game, 3 targets, 3 catches, 55 yards. Obviously, one of them being that big bomb play, which seemed incredibly difficult. The Titans are good against quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points allowed. They've allowed the second fewest wide receiver fantasy points, the fewest tight end fantasy points. So what does it leave? It leaves a running back position where hopefully Ray Davis would be able to attack them. So very much on board with Ray Davis. Nick Chubb, I mentioned this one, but we don't know if he's going to play. There's an element the Browns have to bring him off IR this week, otherwise he defaults to being on there for the rest of the season. So even if he's brought up off IR completely, then it might not be a case that he's going to go out there and play. And even if he does play, he might not play a huge amount. But at 2,200, Nick Chubb is awfully tempting. What do you think about this against a Bengals defense who have been very poor against the run all year? They ranked 22nd in DVOA. They've allowed 14th most running back fantasy points. And we're talking about a Browns offense without Amari Cooper now.
Yeah, I think this is interesting, isn't it? And this is where I mentioned earlier about this slate feels so kind of up in the air at the running back position because there's 4 or 5 guys who, depending on if they're active or not, could completely change the slate. If Nick Chubb's active, I think he's worth a flyer because, we know that he can get there on, even if he gets 8, 9 touches, he's still going to overpay his cost. So yeah, I think it's worth a flyer. If it opens up other things in your rest of your lineup, great. I don't love the matchup. I think that the Bengals can absolutely stomp all over the Browns, if I'm brutally honest. But yeah, 2,200, a guy that could see double-digit touches, even in his first game back, is easily worth a flyer, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not expecting Nick Chubb to come out here and look like prime Nick Chubb, but like the Browns need a PR win. They are down so bad on so many levels right now, and I think the team would love to see sort of 10 touches from Nick Chubb. Those are our Week 7 Fantasy Game Day picks. Of course, we will update if any big news comes through, and of course, you can find more of our work on the main Fantasy Sanctuary channel, but hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment and tell us how you're feeling about this slate, what stands out to you. We want to hear. We want to make DFS great in the UK again, and use promo code TFS23 when joining Fantasy Game Day for a free second entry if you haven't already. Good luck this weekend.